Right. Cover that up. My high-tech covering there. So, lovely. So, let's make a start. Rub your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. The other side. And then the upper part of your chest. Belly. And your legs. Right. Sitting back. So the idea of the reclining position is to really familiarize yourself with some of the basic qualities that we're wanting to develop for the upright positions, in particular this sense of sinking back. And I think that probably comes a little bit easier here. Just have your feet out at a comfortable distance. I'm going to move on a little bit further, almost like you're in a deck chair. It comes from a posture, a sister art to Tai Chi called I Chuan, where they hold postures. Actually, what they do is they hold their arms up like this. We don't need to do that, because I think just feeling how gravity pulls you into the chair is a useful thing to note. And with that, a kind of releasing of tightness. Even in the chair, we often kind of hold ourselves. I don't know if you've ever you sat watching a film or reading a book and suddenly realise you're twisted up or tensed up. It's funny how we do these kind of things, but we do it to ourselves quite a lot. So it's just to recognise that and to recognise how to go about releasing that, and that when we do, what the result is, and this stronger feeling that we can feel the chair more, and when we're upright, we can feel the inner structure of the body more. So when we look for that in other circumstances, we have a sense of what we're looking for. Now bring your feet in, and so that same feeling of the tightness in your body draining away or dissolving away or melting away, however you sort of label it, however you experience it. And to enable that, thinking about your posture and thinking about how you're supported. So I'm a little bit forwards in the chair, just slightly angled forward, so there's a gentle pressure in the soles of my feet. What I want to feel is that it's almost like my feet are sinking into the floor, as though they're on soft sand. And it's actually the soles of your feet that you will need to soften, because presumably the floor beneath you is quite hard. And so that begins that sort of releasing, draining feeling, because when if for instance, you hold your toes deliberately tight, just to squeeze them in, you'll feel that your calf muscles tense up. If you try and hold your calves tight, your thigh muscles will tense up. So you reverse that, you soften the toes, you just let the toes spread out, let the calves relax, the thighs, and so on and so forth. So it begins that draining away feeling all the way through your body. Obviously, if you need to sit back to rest your back, you must do that. It's no good sitting there with a tight back. That doesn't help. You may even want to be a little bit further back. So it's just the lower part of your back against the chair. Remember that most chairs will have you leaning slightly back. So that's not a position that we want to do most of the exercises from. Mostly we want to be upright, and in fact in the chair, slightly angled forwards. But this as a resting position is very useful if you feel you need a kind of pit stop and just to get away from that, rest your back, come back into the movements. I'm going to come forwards again and then just settle in. Notice that paying this attention, close attention to the sort of technicalities of posture, also brings your attention into your body, so that quietening of your thoughts, your attention, and then turning your head. And then hands in front of your shoulders. So your posture should enable your movement. So every now and then it's a good idea just to really think about this posture, both seated and standing, and going forwards. Because for anything else to work, you want the energy to flow and so on and so forth. You really do want to be able to make sure that the mechanics of the body, and some of those are very, very subtle, of course, in Tai Chi, but we want to make sure that they're working for us. And then put your hands down. It's like if you ride a bike or drive a car. If the machine is in good order, it's much more efficient. The journey is much smoother. And then winding around. And back the other way. And rest your hands, easing forwards and push back. So it's quite difficult to maintain your posture and your root excuse me, while you're moving. The image I sometimes offer to people, the idea, if you get on a bus or a train and there's nowhere to sit and you think, well, that's okay, I'll stand, no problem. And then it starts moving, and as soon as it starts moving, it's much more difficult to stand. You may have to hold on to something. So when we introduce movement, change, it's really important that we have an idea of what we want from our posture, and the feeling of the movement, if we're going to try and sustain that. Key things are always going to be rooting down, lower your center of gravity, just the less strain there is on your body. Initiating movement from the lower part of your body, your feet and your hips, when you're seated. Your feet, really, when when you're standing, or at least if you want to take that to a slightly more advanced way of thinking, you want to feel that the center of your body sort of moves, if you like, from foot to foot, or from hips to feet, rolls forwards and backwards. So that takes the idea of the center into something more than just the physical center of the body, but actually encompassing the whole of that lower part of your body. As though there were a ball there, one of these big blue balls, and it rolls forwards and backwards. But the key thing, initially at least, is not to initiate any of the movements from your shoulders, from your arms or your hands, but to feel at this kind of deeper source. So when we turn, it's not our shoulders we're going to think about when we turn, it's our hips, and the whole of the upper body turns just a little bit, and then that means that you automatically move towards the leg, the foot that you're looking towards. And then come back and turn in the other direction. And then circling around. So it's quite difficult to feel that sense of moving from deeper within your body. Partly because what we see, the first thing that we see is the upper part of the body, shoulders, head, arms. What you'll see here is my head apparently going around in a circle. And so quite naturally, what you're trying to do is you try and move your head. But hopefully you can see the pattern on my t-shirt. If I drop my hands down, you can see that movement there. Then go back the other way. Gradually this becomes much more instinctive for you. And that's useful because it means that we begin to more naturally move that way when we're out and about. So the stability of our movement that we find in Tai Chi, the fluidity, the strength of the movement that we find when we practice Tai Chi gradually makes itself apparent not just in the Tai Chi sessions, but in our daily lives. And then come back to the center. Then pull one knee up, step forwards, plant your foot forwards again, that little bit of a push into the floor. Good. And then on the other side. And moving it back. We could spend a lot longer on all of those, particularly the step in, transfer of the weight, and so on and so forth. Some of you may have heard me say this a couple of years ago. I went to one of my regular teachers who's based in Reading. I generally go down there once a month. So it's quite a drive down there. It's a 2-hour drive there, 2 hours back. It's quite an effort to get there. And we just did simple stepping for about half an hour or so. And it was great. It was really, I started in 1983, so this stuff is very familiar to me, and yet it was really useful to focus on it. And I was reflecting on that, thinking, actually, if that was all we'd done during that day, it would have been a worthwhile trip. So every now and then it's useful to really focus on these things in a bit more detail. Otherwise we start to take them for granted. And the act of focusing physically hardwires certain movements, certain ways of moving into our brain and into our nervous system if we repeat them enough, so that it becomes as natural as, I don't know, brushing your hair out your eyes or whatever, just part of how we move. So when we now come into what we think of as the main body of exercises, those elements will recede slightly. They should be there on what we might think of as a subconscious level. But when something starts to go wrong, when the movement feels wrong, or when we're doing something complicated and we can't figure out what the arms are doing, we need to get into the habit of coming back to those basics. If it's like, you can't, what's he doing with his arms? How does that arm get there? Don't start twisting up in the upper part of your body. Remember, bring your attention back to your center. Bring your attention back to your hips, your legs, your feet, the movement of your weight. Rebuild the movement from underneath each time. So it's a habit we try and get into. So now just let your hands drop down by your sides. So there's a movement outwards and there's a movement back. And our attention can follow that, so that intent, if you like, to come back to, if you like, recenter, to re-establish the equilibrium, again, all sorts of ways of describing it, is built into the movement. And you'll find that all the movements, one way or another, follow this pattern. So while you're doing this, just think of it not in two stages. You know, we tend to think we go forwards, we go backwards, our arms follow, and we don't want to pay too much attention to trying to move the arms, we just allow them to move. But when you come back to this rear position, just settle in for a moment and then go forwards. It's just a split second. So you go forwards, you backwards, and you settle. And as you settle, your hands swing past and forwards. You may even get a sense of settling into your feet. So it could be 4 stages. Back, settle, notice your arms going back as you do, forwards. Give yourself a moment to really feel the weight in your feet. So fishermen cast a net, as a very straightforward and familiar exercise, is a great way to just note that. And again, after a while, what you'll find is it's less of a labour to get the settling, and it takes hardly any time at all, a split second. But it's quite useful every now and then to just focus on it for a little bit, to take a second or two to settle in. You will lose the flow a little bit, but you'll soon get that back. Although what you may find is that you get quite an interesting sense of movement in the upper part of your body as you settle, because it kind of frees up the upper part of your body. Now coming over, now here, the setting is that your hips sink down, your shoulders drop, your hands follow. So we can feel like in Embrace Tiger Return to Mountain that we do at the end of the class. We get a real sense of how that feels physically to get that settling. And in many ways, that should be the prelude and the finish to all actions that we take. One of the old writings in Tai Chi tells us to seek the stillness within the movement. So there's times when we're busy and things can be a bit hectic for one reason or another. If we want to find that sense of calmness in our minds, we can access that by finding the sensations in the body, literally allowing your hips to drop. And then this time, drawing back. So the opening up of that possibility of finding that quietness and that stillness is, for me, one of the great gifts of Tai Chi. So pigeon spreads its wings. And then pushing a wave. One more time. Remember, you can sort of check in with that quieter feeling at any point, really, but here's a good point. And you roll your hand into a fist. And then turn it down. Here, hips sink, shoulders sink, hands drop down and they wind around and they come up very gently, which is interesting. It's not getting out to here and then struggling to bring your hands in. You actually achieve more by taking that little bit of stillness, that little bit of quietness. And in the first instance, it doesn't seem as though that's possible. You think, I'm too busy to do that, it's too much to do. And yet it actually enables more action. And then bring your hands in and push. A moment to settle. Expanding, contracting. A moment to settle. And then wild goose. And parting the clouds. And let your hands drop down, let your hips drop, the shoulders drop again, that moment of settling, and then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So this is quite an interesting exercise from that point of view of that stillness, because quite often we find ourselves speeding up. So if you think about this exercise, it's one hand, then the other, then you change sides again, and so on and so forth. And yet what we can find ourselves doing without realizing it is, one hand will come down and we get to about here, and the other hand's starting to twitch a little bit. It wants to do something. So it's a good exercise to really feel whether you have got this sense of the stillness. And what we want to do is not switch our attention abruptly from one side to another, but rather you feel your attention on one side, your hand goes up, it comes down, all the way down, you feel the arm dropping, and then your fingers uncurling, and then you sort of scan across, you notice the center of your body, and then this side, you push your foot and your hip down, and you start again on the other side, like a camera, slowly panning across a landscape. So here's one side, you feel the movement right down, maybe into your foot as well, in the center of your body, then the hip and the foot on the opposite side, and then the movement. So you're paying very, very close attention to the body, not just going, okay, here's one side, finish that, I'm going to start the other side. You've got plenty of time. This always makes me think of the opening lines from the lovely poem by W.H. Davis. What is this world if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. And we often find that very difficult. But training ourselves to recognize these small changes, small sensations in our body is a really good way of actually slowing us down and giving us time to stand and stare. we'll do one more of these. And then hands together. And again, we expand, we contract, perhaps more than a lot of the other exercises. This really shows us that we need to come into the center before we move out again. Because it's that sense of coming into the center. Again, I mentioned there's that idea of a ball. It's like the ball gets squeezed in and then it pushes out. So without the drawing in, there is no outward movement. Just like without an out breath, there can be no in breath. We can often get the feeling that we're so busy that we haven't got time to stop. But think about what's happening here and in other exercises. It's not a question of whether we've got time, because it is as necessary to draw in as it is to push out. The Chinese terms are yin and yang. Yang, the outward movement, yin, the inward. And then this time, it gets a little bit more complex because we want to add the turning. And there's a lot of people can forget here, we haven't just got to turn the other way, we come back to the center first. And then we push out. Back to the center. And push out. So it's being still and being active are not contradictions. They're two sides of the same circle. Again, recognize the sensations in your body in that inward movement. One more round. As you draw in with your arms, your leg extends, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. We extend out and we come back and we settle. And actually, interestingly, with this exercise, it's the very act of allowing the center of your body, your hips, to settle back into the chair that enables the upper part of the body to open. So this is no longer either or, but rather both the inward and the outward movement, both the yin and the yang, combining to give you the movement. Hence the idea of the stillness within the movement. And then we change from that lower point, grasping the tiger's ears. And then on the other side, So just trying to let go of that mentality that says that we have to do more. We have to cram more in. It's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing things. And then change. One more time. And then, so it's important to realize I've been talking about sort of yin yang as though they're separate. They're not. The inward and the outward, the, if you like, the settling and the active outward movement are not separate things that just happen to coincide together. They're one and the same thing. If you spin a wheel, one part of the wheel will be going up, another part of the wheel will be going down, one part will be going in one direction horizontally, the other, and so on and so forth. And at the centre of it all, you've got the hub of the wheel. And the hub of the wheel is held still. If the hub wobbles around, the wheel goes all wobbly. So this is not either or that we're actually talking about here. It's one of the reasons we use that image of the centre of the body being like the hub of the wheel. Sometimes it's useful to see them as separate, or for one to be more dominant than another, but they're very much bound up with each other. I use the term yin yang. We often say yin and yang, but actually in the Chinese language there isn't a character for yang. I'm sorry. So it's not yin and yang, or yin or yang, it's yin yang, one thing with two different aspects to it. So going back to Fisherman Cast the Net for a couple of rounds, and we're going to build from this into Wind Blows the Willows. And like when we turn a wheel, the turn is made from the centre of the wheel, the hub of the wheel. The change is made here in the hips and the waist. And we can just feel how our shoulders and our arms follow that movement. Then we're going into one side, so it's like I'm pushing a little bit with the shoulder. I turn to the side and just see, I can only really do it with one hand, but you maybe see a little bit better what I mean here. I go forward into this leg, the far leg from you, and you see my shoulder going forwards, and that sends the hand behind. I come back to the centre, I go forwards into the nearer leg, turn, and that sends the hand forwards. I'm exaggerating all this a little bit as always, because the movement should really be a little bit more subtle than that. So probably looked as though my shoulder was going out of line, which it probably was a little bit. And then, if you're comfortable with this, you want to try dragonfly skims the wall to raise the foot. You could just raise the knee, so it's just your heel coming off the floor. Or if you want to, raise the heel and then the toes. And again, if it's comfortable for you, you could rotate. So it's the inside of the foot that comes up. That's quite strong on your hip. Be very careful with that. So take it to whatever point is appropriate for you, and don't be in a rush to move on. I'm not trying to suggest that this is somehow better than the previous stages. And then resting. So once again, rubbing your hands together and tapping over your face. Over your head. Down to your shoulder and your arm. And then side. Half of the chest. Belly. And then your legs. Lovely. So stand. So Tai Chi, I do it myself. Sometimes we might describe Tai Chi as mind and body. It's not entirely accurate. It shouldn't be mind and body. It should be mind body or body mind or something like that. Because everything we do involves both elements. In fact, those three elements, I've talked about the three jewels before. Very grateful that I was really introduced to Tai Chi in this way very early on in my development. My first teacher, Bronwyn, very much took this sort of approach, and it was never presented to me as a purely as a kind of physical exercise. I always remember Bronwyn saying to us quite often, she would say, we'd be going down into this arch, and she said, "Don't worry, you'll find yourself standing like this in supermarket queues." I can remember standing there, my legs hurting, thinking, why would I want to do that to myself? And sure enough, one day I'm standing in one of these long queues at the supermarket that can be so frustrating and so annoying. You know, the machines aren't working or whatever, and you can feel people getting agitated in those sort of circumstances. And I just found myself doing this quite naturally. And I realised then what I'd done. I didn't think, oh, I better do that. It was just natural for me to look for this settling, both in mind and body, that the actual physical act was the mental act, or vice versa. And just feeling some of that sort of agitation slipping away. If I'd wanted to do something about it, which is reasonable, I could have walked out the shop, or could have gone and talked to the manager, or whatever. But in the first instance, I just didn't need everybody else's agitation, and I just did this. And then I thought, well, that's interesting. I actually feel much calmer now. So this is how it works in Tai Chi. Not mind and body, or mind over matter, but rather the integration where those barriers, those divisions don't actually exist. So sinking down and then pushing out. So we practice those ideas when we're presented with a movement like, say, dragonfly skims the water. There's quite a lot going on. They really should be seen as an encouragement to center. One more time. And then the wild goose. And part in the clouds. And shake it. 1 foot forwards. So again, not 2 stages to this movement, but 4 stages. The weight transfers and you just allow yourself to settle. The weight transfers, you allow yourself to settle. And as before, that period of settling, actually the length of time that it takes shortens until it just becomes an integral part of the movement and the flow returns. And you'll see in a moment that actually it is that settling in that moment when we do things like fishermen cast the net, wind blows the willows, it's that moment that actually means that we can negotiate these more complex exercises without straining. On the other side. Just realised I'm a bit offline. And shake out. So, fisherman cast a net is as we settle that the arms swing out. It's as we settle that the arms swing out. Wind blows the willows is as we settle and the arms start to swing out that we turn and that redirects the arms. Come back, the momentum is there, the energy is there. It just needs guiding through the centre of the body. So let's do that. I'll do it with my back tube. We'll go fisherman cast a net, wind blows the willows. And here, you still see me? Good. Start on the back foot, fisherman cast a net. This time you come into your back foot and settle and turn. Don't concern yourself with how far your arms are moving. Probably not very far to begin with, because that's not really where your attention is, but it will gradually build. So we learn to bring our attention back to our center, especially, if you get to a point and you're doing this, and really, truly, I'm trying to get you to that point. So then you go, oh, which way, what do I do with my arms? Hold on, not the arms, it's the body. And just let the process take over, as it were. So, which way is that? Yeah. So right foot forwards. Okay, so fisherman cast the net. And wind blows the willows. And so back to your chair. It would be nice to think that we could always keep that sense of being centered and so on and so forth the whole time. In practice, it's not nearly that straightforward and that easy. I was very impressed many years ago, not long after I started teaching with one of my students. I did a series of 3-day workshops in one of the village colleges. And this was a long time ago, and things like that were less common in those days. Normally you would expect to have to sort of like train for 2 hours every morning for 20 years before you got anywhere in Tai Chi or whatever. But anyway, I did the workshops. And the woman came back to the second one, having been to the first one. And as I say, I was really impressed with what she said, because she had some kind of executive job. This is back in about sort of, late 1980s, early 1990s. There were no mobile phones or anything in those days. And she said she was on her way to a conference to give a presentation at this conference, so quite an important event. She got stuck in traffic, which is typical, isn't it? It's happened to all of us. And of course, it's very frustrating. You sit in the car and you get more what's the time, and I'm going to be late, and what do I do, and so on and so forth. She eventually got to the conference centre, and she described it. She said she sort of parked the car, jumped out the car, grabbed her bag, kind of ran into the building. And she got to the doors of the conference hall, and she suddenly remembered how she felt on the day of Tai Chi. That calmness and that quietness, and she thought, what am I doing? And she said, rather than just sort of running into the hall and dashing up and saying, "Oh, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." She sat down outside, and she said, "I just sat down, made myself comfortable, did some gentle breathing, and then took a couple of minutes to do that, felt more relaxed, got up, breezed into the hall, wandered up to the front, said, 'Sorry, I'm late, I got stuck in traffic.'" And everybody went, "Oh, okay, that happens a lot, doesn't it? We've all been stuck in traffic." And she was still late. She wasn't going to be able to change that. She was a couple of minutes later, but well, what difference does that make? But she said it went fine. And she was sure she would have mucked up the presentation if she'd been like that. So it was more efficient for her to take a little bit more time. And that really encapsulates, I think, a lot of what is good about Tai Chi. So sometimes it's good, you know, I talk about this very holistic view, but sometimes it's useful just to focus on one thing or one or two things. And I think when we get to Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain today, I've sometimes said to you, what is it? Is it the image of the mountain, or a sensation in your body, or the breathing, or whatever? One or two things that in those moments when you're about to dash into the room or something like that, you can just take a few moments out to quieten yourself, to still yourself, so that when you go into the situation, you're much more centered and much more able to deal with it. So before we do that, just if you're one of the people who comes on a Monday, I will be running a session on a Monday. I know it's a bank holiday, but I'm going to do the session. So if anybody can make it, that would be great. If you can't make it, have a good weekend. I know, bank holiday weekend, sometimes we do things even in these circumstances. So and then the week after that, of course, I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks, but there will be a couple of things that will arrive in your inbox, a couple of things just to keep you in touch with things over the period. And then later in September, from the 21st, I will pick up the online sessions again. There is a move towards sort of, face-to-face classes coming, but I will be working those around these online sessions, at least until Christmas time, because as far as I can see, that's where a lot of the focus of attention is going to be. But of course, as sort of like more face-to-face sessions come up, I will let people know what's going on. But for now, coming back, so Embrace Tiger, Return to the Mountain. Pay attention so that you just notice one or two things that you can store away that are useful for you. You breathe in if you want to follow the breathing, in breath and out breath. In breath and out. And rest. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that, and have a good weekend. As I said, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next week sometime, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Bye all. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.